Every now and then, someone will ask me if I had any good teachers when I was at school. I always reply yes, I had 4, and they were called the Beatles. One of the many lessons they taught me was that hello should be long and goodbye should be short. If only that were the case with the transfer window, where player moves seem to drag on for weeks. Now, I've never been tapped up, but in the unlikely event that I was, I'd have taken Lewis Graham's lead, pointed at the Jubilee gates, and said, "I'm happy here, thanks." Because my name's Michael, and this is All Departments.
Here come the cherries, and we're heading for the top of the tree. Bournemouth is a team that's going to show Division 3. Here come the leaders and the scorers at the Saturday, showing how to win the Southern way. So we sing, come on Bournemouth, come on Bournemouth. While you're out there winning, hear the shouting and the singing. We sing, come on Bournemouth, come on Bournemouth. Here come the cherries, here come the cherries, here come the cherries, number 1.
Hello and welcome to episode 12 of All Departments. Life around Dean Court has rarely been simple over the years, and one man who has been in the thick of all of the dramatic episodes in our recent history is current chairman Jeff Mostyn. I sat down with Jeff just after New Year to discuss the past, the present and the future of our beloved Cherries.
Jeff, welcome to All Departments.
Thank you.
So, you've now been in your second spell as the Cherries chairman for a few months, and I imagine it's quite a bit different to your first spell, which was quite dramatic.
Yes, well, I think you've just used the word that I would have responded with. It is a dramatic change in circumstances. Everything about the club has changed dramatically since the first spell in 2007.
Can you remember how you first got involved with the club? Were you a supporter beforehand, or was it somebody that you knew that piqued your interest?
Yes, there was somebody I knew. Just happened to be our manager at the time, Kevin Bond. Kevin had been my friend for the best part of 30 years. I'm from Manchester, as you know, and I was asked by Kevin I first met Kevin when his father was manager at Manchester City, and he was a player at Manchester City. That's how our relationship started. And of course, when we moved south in 1984, not quite as south as this, as far as Newbury, we continued our friendship with Kevin and his wife, and John and the family. And the club, as you know, towards the end of 2006, were in precarious financial, or suffering precarious financial difficulties, which I think is something that is, from what I now understand, historic with the club. It didn't just start in 2006. I was asked by Kevin to come down to meet the then chairman, Abdul Jaffer, who was looking to put forward a consortium. Kevin said, because of my love of football, I know somebody who may be interested. I'm not sure I would ever thank him for that now, with hindsight. But I came down and I met Abdul Jaffer late October 2006, and it was probably my sort of Victor Khayyam moment. I came through the front door of the football club. I loved it so much I finished up buying the football club, and it turned out to be the most expensive lunch I'd ever had in my life. And that's really what brought me to Dean Court.
It was a very eventful first spell, no more so than when we went into administration at the start of 2008 with reported debts of £4.5 million. What was that like?
It was probably the lowest, one of the lowest points of my life. Having come into the football club, I now realise that when you sort of embark upon getting involved financially with a football club, you tend to, leave your brains at home, and it's your heart that rules your head. And I think that the same can be said, for anybody getting involved in football. It is a passion, and as well as I, as a supporter. And at the end of the day, that's what we are. I happen to be chairman of the football club now, but I'm a supporter. No more, no less than anybody else involved in the football club. And supporters make irrational judgments, at time in their own life. I just happened to make a big one, a very expensive one, when I got involved with the football club. But it became personal, and unless you're ever involved and you realise it's not like taking over a normal business, where you can make good decisions, you can make bad decisions, and short of affecting the staff, the decisions, lie firmly on your shoulders. When you're chairman of a football club and an owner of a football club, you're talking of affecting 10,000 people. If you take, our hardcore supporters, whilst we only average at that stage less than 5,000, you never know which 5,000 are turning up. So I've always felt there was, 10,000 hardcore Cherry supporters. And the abuse I had, really was something that I'm probably only just getting over now, because it not only affected me, it affected my family. And I've never known anything like that in my life, where you're giving up your time, unpaid. I've never taken a penny out of the football club, by way of a postage stamp or a gallon of petrol, through expenses. So I'm throwing in a lot of money, a fortune, to me, and it's all relative. And I'm getting abused for the privilege of doing it. I would have been, some people said better off giving it to charity, where I'd have been praised for it. Not that I was looking for praise, but it is hard when you're actually putting, hard-earned money into a club and still getting personal abuse for the benefit of doing it.
I think that as fans, we only have a slight grasp of what you might describe as the murky world of football finance, and our expectations, much as they are with the team and the manager of the chairman, are in some ways unrealistic, particularly for a club like us, as we were during that period and for most of our history leading up to that.
Yeah.
And it's no surprise to me when chairmen over the years have walked away, because the personal grief that they get must be something that's really difficult to put up with. But you didn't walk away for quite some time. You didn't really walk away at all. You just guided us through the administration, invested what I understand was a considerable sum of your own money. But it was quite a protracted saga. I think there was a few failed bids, names like Mark Jackson, EU UK, Alan Pither. They were really testing times for the clubs. You had the CVA to sort out, which is an extremely complex matter, I understand. Yeah, it dragged on for months, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if I knew you were going to mention those names, I would have, instead of having Matt here, I would have actually asked the club doctor to come and accompany me for this interview today. Just the very names, send shivers up my spine. I think that it's best summed up by the administrator that, when a football club is up for sale, there's probably 30 million people that are saying, I would like to take over that football club. But Gerald Krasner made it quite clear at one of the press conferences that he'd had hundreds of people who were interested in the football club, but only one person ever wrote a cheque, and that was me. And that was the frustrating saga, as you say, the protracted saga of buying the football club. There was a lot of non-disclosed, debt at the football club. My, having employed lawyers who never come cheap, and especially looking into accounts at a football club, that was rather murky at the time. It cost me an awful lot of money just to do the due diligence, and I'll never forget my lawyers summing up. Rather than, the first phone call was, Jeff, we've finished the due diligence now, and rather than send you the 50-page report, we'll just give you a headline summary. And as you know, I'm a thoroughbred mank for my sins. And they summed it up by saying, Jeff, our recommendation, having done the due diligence, is for you to get into your car and drive as fast as you can up the M6 back to Manchester. That was the summary. And I obviously, as history tells you, chose to ignore that fact. And it added salt to the wound, because I suddenly thought, why on earth would I employ lawyers to do the due diligence and then ignore them? I could have ignored them and saved myself, somewhere in the region of £40,000, at the time, which would have been useful to put that additional sum into the football club. But that emphasises and highlights how your heart is ruling your head, rather than the reverse. But that is all history now, and I think it's made me a better person. I have a far greater understanding of how one man's decisions can affect an awful lot of people in the community. And I think that the one thing I reflect on that gives me the greatest amount of pride is that I'm still here. That I had ample opportunity to walk away from the football club, and most people in my position would have done. And indeed, if you look at my peers who have been unfortunate enough to have had the same predicament as me, not just at this football club, but within football per se, they have walked away. There's very few, that have actually demonstrated being a glutton for punishment. As I did. But that gives me a great sense of personal pride, at the football club and within the community. And if there were any doubters, which I know there were many, hence the, offensive comments, I hope I've won them over. Because that does mean an awful lot to me. People that know me know that I am a very sensitive and emotional person. And I like to think that what I've done has been clearly demonstrated to be in the best interest of the football club.
Yeah, and I think your return to the chairmanship has been largely welcomed by the fans. We're on a much firmer footing now, it appears, from the outside. So hopefully you'll enjoy it more than you did last time as well. Just going back to those days, unfortunately we were relegated. We nearly clawed our way out of it, even though we had a 10-point reduction at Carlisle. We were kind of forced to sell Sam Vokes to Wolves.
Yes.
And that never goes down well with the fans, does it, when players are sold? Yes. And then over that summer, the takeover saga seemed to be coming to an end when Sports 6 stepped in with Paul Baker and Savvy. No sooner had they taken control than we were docked 17 points, which is, I think, a little bit more than we expected, and things didn't really work out after their takeover for quite a while, did they?
No. I think if we sort of take that sequentially, that the relegation at Carlisle, if you recall, coincided with my daughter's wedding day. And that was extremely emotional, and our friends at Radio Solent very kindly delivered a sort of an earpiece to me on Friday night before they set off for Carlisle, which was a single frequency feed. And during the ceremony I had this in my ear, and I was, I have to say, and even I think there was some deliberation during the week on Radio Solent.
Were you wearing it going up the aisle with your daughter?
Whether I would actually go to Carlisle or whether I'd go to my daughter's wedding. And I think I answered one interview by saying, it's an obvious answer, I'm going to Carlisle. But I chose not to, and of course went to my daughter's wedding, as did Kevin's family, our manager's family. So in the end, it was a very tearful occasion, and I think my tears were only masked by the wedding, and most people felt that the father of the bride is generally in tears. Most people present thought I was crying because I was giving my daughter away. I was obviously in tears because we'd been relegated, right at the 11th hour. And the results that day were, just added insult to injury, because nobody would have expected that if we got a point at Carlisle that we would have been relegated. I think it was the Cheltenham result that was against all odds.
That was the one.
My memory serves me
right. It was,
yeah. So that relegated us into the second division. At the time, of course, we had the 10-point penalty, and then we were going to get another a further 10 points, 17 points. The next season, and that materialised because of the saga at Leeds. And Leeds were made. They made an example. The Football League made an example of Leeds because of their sort of back-to-back administrations, and also the way that the club was sold. and taken over, effectively by the same trading company. And I think that the Football League wanted to really start to make an example. Unfortunately, in the slipstream of Leeds, you had AFC Bournemouth and you had Rotherham and Luton, of course. Luton suffered further penalties. I think it was 30 at the time, because of the financial irregularities, which I'm pleased to say we didn't suffer. Ours was the irregularities where we had less money than we needed, but there was nothing untoward about our administration. So along with Rotherham, we shared the 17 points. I think again, if my memory serves me right, Luton had 30 in all, and it was just an absolute miracle that we survived on the last day of the season. Otherwise, we may not be having this interview now, or we may be having it with us in a completely different position. Well, there's no maybe. We would have done, whether the club would have survived a period in the conference, or the lower divisions, the lower echelon of the non-league football. Then who knows? History has written the fact that we're now in the Championship. And amongst all that, I had to, personally fund the administration, and that was my commitment to the football club. I chose to, having put them into administration, I wasn't going to shirk my responsibilities. You'll know the infamous interview, the live broadcast with Gerald Krasner, where he'd warned me prior to that interview that unless I wrote a cheque for £100,000, he would liquidate the club on air. I decided, and having left home that morning, I think my wife, did not want me to have any further financial, burden, at the club, having tried to already sell the football club. And Gerald said to me, Jeff, you stand at the back of the room, the back of the press, and he said, what is going to happen is I will introduce myself and explain where we are in the administration process. You will nod if you're going to give me a cheque for £100,000, and you will nod your head in a negative fashion if you're not prepared, and at that point I will wind up the football club. That was the challenge I had at a live broadcast. And of course, I just couldn't, after everything that I felt I had done to, save the football club, contrary to what, people would think. I won't use an expletive, on air, but I knew exactly what people thought of me. I just happened to be the person that put the club into administration. I've never, ever to this day felt that I was the person that was responsible for the club going into administration, and I think there is a massive difference there. I inherited an absolute mess. The club could have been liquidated, before I even got involved. But that's conjecture. That's how how strongly I feel about it. And of course, I did the honourable thing. I, nodded my head, gave him a cheque for another £100,000. The club was effectively saved. And at that time, I flew up to Manchester to meet Paul Baker. Now, I was joined at that meeting with a chap called David Hinchcliffe. David Hinchcliffe, who you'll recall, was I say inverted commas, the joint administrator. He was actually the lawyer representing Gerald Krasner at that time. But, to all intents and purposes, they were jointly responsible for administering the administration, forgive the grammar. David was at that meeting with Paul Baker, and Paul Baker came up with a deposit of £50,000, and it was the only cheque that we'd ever seen other than mine. So I couldn't believe my luck. I mean, to give you an idea of how difficult it was to try to find a buyer for this football club, I've joked, as I often do, that having travelled from Land's End to John O'Groats probably 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 times, I started to apply the mirror test. And with Paul Baker, I literally, I've explained that I put a mirror in front of his mouth. It steamed up, and he seemed to be a good buyer because he was alive. And I've repeated that verbatim, and that's how I felt. That somewhere somebody would have the courage, the commitment, and more importantly, the finances to buy the football club. And along with Savio Mutu, he came down to the football club, and you always think you're a smart cookie, that you're street smart. This guy, just had me in knots. He was very sharp, and he came with a lot of credibility from what he'd achieved at Everton. Only afterwards do we actually ascertain that he hadn't achieved what he purported to have achieved at Everton or anywhere else. It was Paul that was putting the money into the football club. To this day, and people often wonder why I'm full of forgiveness. With Paul, I think that he had genuine aspirations to go through with the deal, to go through with the sale, and to make the financial commitment to the football club. Unfortunately, what happened at the time was that it coincided with the downturn in the economy, and his two biggest clients were Woolworths and Xavi. And as a consequence of both Woolworths and Xavi going into administration, it put his transport company into administration as well, and therefore he couldn't commit to the football club. So having gone away thinking I'd sold the football club, I'll never forget, I was in Spain, and it was lunchtime, and I'd ordered a glass of wine to think, God, thank you, at last I've done my bit for Queen and Country and Bournemouth. I got a phone call from Gerald Krasner, to say that things are unpaid, and I need to take options again, because he said I will, come in and with no thought whatsoever for the future of the football club. It was on the verge of administration again, and this was after one season, or less than a season, that they were in charge. And remember, I handed them a completely clean piece of paper. The club had come out of administration, understandably without any debts, and within the space of a year, we'd run up close to another £1 million worth of debts. Now, I don't want to, get into deep water here or say anything that I shouldn't. But on the basis, I'll leave it to your imagination and our supporters' imagination. During that period, we had a transfer embargo, which lasted the best part of 19 months. So on that basis alone, we couldn't buy any players. Generally, debt is in line with your player budget. So having run up over £1 million without the ability to buy a player, I'll leave it to everybody's imagination as to what happened, within the club's finances.
So after Sports 6 came in and we were on minus 17 points at the very bottom of the Football League, yeah. Kevin Bond's time as manager came to an end. I think we played about 4 games. Jimmy Quinn came in. Things didn't really improve up until Eddie Howe arrived as manager, but you stepped down yourself in October of 2008. Was that a relief?
It was. Yes, it certainly was. It was a relief. Simply because of the way the club was being run. I was asked by Paul and Savvy to stay on once they took over the football club, which at the time it seemed to be sort of flattering, and it's always one of these things you don't want to let go. At that time you still think this is my baby, I want to sort of hang on to this and just sort of steer it through a not quite a probationary period, but I suppose, yes, you could say a probationary period, just to see how these two guys are, committed. And I stood down after in October because I didn't like their attitude. I didn't like Savvy's attitude in particular. Was he felt he was some form of football leader. A worldwide supremo, and he had soldiers. He used to actually call people his soldiers, and call a meeting, at the football club for his sort of heads of departments that became soldiers. And it was just the most bizarre thing that I'd ever seen in my life. And I just thought, no, I can't have my name and my, reputation, what was left of it at the time, being associated with these two guys. And of course, it was already the downturn, sort of the worldwide sort of economic meltdown, which it really was probably, the worst downturn in the world economy that, we'd seen. And I could see that the guys were struggling at the end of the month to pay the wages again, and I thought, whoa, have I made a mistake, bringing the guys in? But it was, partly my responsibility, partly Gerald's responsibility to ensure that due diligence was done on the guys. It was not me that was selling the football club, let me make that clear. It was the administrator. I'd put the club into administration. As far as the club were concerned, that was sort of the end of my tenure. And I was appointed a director of the new co, because obviously there was no old co, at that particular stage. And I just happened to decide to fund the administration by way of continuance. Although I've never left, there was, I think it's quite an important, point that, at that stage it was their responsibility, it was the administrator's sole responsibility to find a buyer, for the football club. The fact that I identified them, it was then left to him to make the final decision that they were fit and proper, along with the Football League. The Football League's responsibility to do the financial due diligence as well as the legal due diligence on them. And if it was good enough for the Football League and it was good enough for the administrator, then it was good enough for me. At that stage, I had no say, in the final decision, the same as our supporters. So I think it was it's sort of an important fact. But having got to know them, I could not see that the football club was in my humble opinion, in the right hands. Paul was struggling with his business in the north. He lived in Chester. Savvy was left to run the club himself, and Savvy was running the football club as if he was running Manchester United. He was a fantasist. There was no question about that, and I think probably nothing will change. But until you get to know somebody, you never realise just how they think on a day-to-day basis. So I wanted to remove myself and stood down in October, which coincided. I think it was a matter of days after Kevin and Eddie and Rob, were all dismissed in the boardroom.
That I remember. That period from the late autumn up until Christmas of 2008 was an extremely bleak period at the club. I think it was probably epitomised by our defeat to Blythe Spartans in the FA Cup.
Yes.
I remember driving home that night. I didn't go to that game, and nearly crashed the car when I realised we'd been knocked out by them. Things were going from bad to worse.
Yes.
But then,
can I comment on that?
Sure.
Because that this is conjecture, but having sort of analysed where they were financially, there is no doubt in my mind. So going from conjecture to no doubt in a matter of seconds, that was the catalyst that ended Paul Baker's ownership of the football club. They were 100% dependent on getting that £250,000 worth of television revenue and the home game and the game against Blackburn, had they been successful. And it was literally, I still think to this day that on the return journey from Blythe, it was the beginning of the end for those two guys.
we were in real trouble at that point. We were obviously still at the bottom of the Football League. It felt like we were months from going out of the Football League and probably going out of business. But then things started to turn around with the appointment of Eddie Howe on New Year's Eve. I was at a New Year's Eve party when I heard that, and I was quite surprised. Yes. And I guess at the time it felt like a move of some desperation, or as we've seen subsequently, it couldn't have been better to appoint Eddie as the manager. But were Sports 6 in control of the club then? Because Eddie's always said it was Adam Murray that invited him to.
It was. We had just started to put together a sort of another consortium. And I'm just trying to think of. It was sort of known as the Adam Murray, consortium, of which I was a part. Steve Sly, my sort of ex-vice chairman, was part of this consortium, and the object of the exercise was to, try to get the shares of the football club back, and this, happened because of default. So, although I'd walked away, suddenly you were thrust back into the into the limelight, and Adam had joined forces, with Sport 6. They were looking to try to sell the club on. It was worthless, as you say, languishing at the bottom of the second tier, or the lowest tier, the second division. With a points deficit, in financial chaos again. Who in the right mind would take the club on again? And that's when we were approached and thought, there's only one idiot that he's still alive and eager to help the football club, and that's where the phone call came. And it was Adam's suggestion that we bring Eddie back in as manager. There are all sorts of reasons. And I think whatever reason is put forward is a genuine motive for bringing Eddie back. I think economically it was the right decision. He had been with the football club since he was 11. His heart was in the right place. This is his life, his second family, and all those things just seemed right at the time, to get somebody who was a thoroughbred cherry, at the helm, to try to turn the corner. And, as I've been on record saying, there's nobody that's more articulate, more astute, more dedicated. I've never met anybody, in particular somebody of such a young age, to show such maturity in all aspects of life and football knowledge. It's a real, privilege to be working with him. Then and even more so now.
So, results picked up. I remember being at Dagenham and Redbridge, and Mark Molesley scoring in about the 93rd minute, and that took us out of the relegation zone for the first time that season. It'd been a few years since I'd felt like that at a football match. It took me quite a while to get to sleep that night. And we had a few other great results, including the day against Grimsby here at Dean Court, when Steve Fletcher scored that goal, which, just thinking about, tends to put me in the party mood. You must have felt enormous relief that day.
Oh, I mean, again, it's indescribable. I think the moments that you have of the highs and lows, people talk about extreme emotion, from thinking back to the dark days of the administration. This was like, us winning the Premier League, and it's all success is all relative. Whatever you're winning, you can only win and achieve within the confines of the league that you're in. And that, to me, was a defining moment in this club's history, both past, and current history, because it became, we didn't know it at the time, but of course it became the foundation for us to be in the Championship today, as opposed to be, languishing, unheard of, many leagues below where we are now. So the significance of goals, sort of, people say like the David Beckham goal, that took us to the World Cup. That, to me, is completely and utterly insignificant in comparison to the big man's goal, here on that very day.
That summer, the group that you were involved in with Adam Murray gained control of the football club, and that group, I believe, included Eddie Mitchell. Did Eddie approach you first, or did you already know him?
No, I'd previously approached Eddie Mitchell prior to approaching Paul Baker and Savvy. Eddie was in Dubai at the time, and it was getting very close to the the darkest hour of liquidation rather than administration. And he couldn't come back in time to do any due diligence. And I think Eddie all along, felt that if we put the club into administration, he would be interested in getting involved. But to come in and help me with a rescue package was not something that whetted his appetite. And in fairness, that sounds, sort of extremely harsh. Many things that are said are harsh, but true. And I can understand, had he phoned me, and said, Jeff, we're on the verge of administration. Would you like, would you be kind enough to write me a cheque for a couple of $100,000? I might have suddenly lost him in translation. So those are the hardcore facts, that he wasn't really interested unless the club, had a fresh beginning, and then any investment was going to take the club forward rather than just fill in a hole that had been created by some other party. So I got another phone call. Eddie was following the progress of the sort of the failure of Savvy and Paul, and phoned me and said, right, if we can, if the club is going into administration, then I'd be very interested in being part of Newco, the football club, going forward. And that's how that manifested itself, and through a number of meetings down at Eddie's offices in Sandbanks, we sort of put together a rescue plan, whereas because of the default on the purchase, I was, if you like, in control of the shares. And we decided that going forward as partners, would be in the best interest of the football club. Eddie fully understood my position that in terms of investment, I would like to put in less than more. Having already put in more, and Eddie was, I think, on that basis, very, very happy. As the split went, that we were starting off in round terms at 50-50. Steve had a few shares, and he wanted to have a 1% option on 1% of mine, effectively giving him control. And that's how Eddie Mitchell had always worked. Everybody knows that. As he said, recently to me, how I've worked with you for 4 years. It's a miracle I've only ever worked with other people for about 4 weeks. But that's how, because Eddie has always worked for himself, and he has to be in control, and that's fine. You join people in respect of how they want to go forward, or you don't get into bed with them, metaphorically speaking, in the first instance. So that's how the partnership started, and then we still had a battle, with the Football League right through to practically kick-off day, where we still were waiting to get the golden share back. And the golden share is a mythical share that's given to all of the Football League clubs. So without the golden share, you cannot play league football, just for the record. And ironically, it is that golden share that has given the Football League the benefit of preferential status in the financial world. When the government changed the laws to get rid of preferential creditors, including the banks and HMRC, the last remaining stalwart of the past was the Football League. And without it, we all know the Football League, the Football League would collapse, because it's the integrity of the Football League that allows transfers to take place, knowing that from Football League grants, funds will be provided. You would have doubt if you wanted to trust another club to pay you the instalments that were due, when you know that there's a huge majority of Football League clubs in financial debt. So that's how that sort of partnership manifested itself.
And Eddie Mitchell came in as chairman, and we had a great season. The next season, 2009-2010, we were promoted to League One at Burton Albion, and things were on the up. What was it like working with Eddie Mitchell? Because you spoke about how you came in for quite a lot of flack from the fans. He did as well. He was a very colourful character. I think some fans felt that he was hot-headed and not really the right person for the job. I never really felt like that. I felt that he must have quite a bit of business acumen and so forth to have achieved what he had previously. What was it like working with him day to day?
It was a great. I think it was stressful. I think the sheer existence, of the football club at the time, whilst, you've alluded to the fact that things seemed to be going really well, there was a great deal of stress because Eddie is a very, very demanding character. Eddie doesn't suffer fools gladly, doesn't suffer them at all. And as a consequence of that, and this is, sort of right for the football club, we had to raise a huge amount of money to keep the club alive, afloat, and going forward. And what Eddie had made quite clear, from day one, is that he didn't want to be putting in, the family jewels into the football club. That if we were to make this work, we had to make it work commercially. So there were huge demands commercially. We had a board meeting every Monday morning, and targets were set as to who was going to be raising the money. And we had every incentive that God's ever put on earth in that first year. From the bricks to the lifetime vice president to a sod of turf. You name it, we were trying to sell it. If it moved, in the conurbation, we would stick an AFCB sticker on it and demand £5 or £10. And all credit, he did an amazing job, driving on the economic, side of things. My role sort of changed somewhat. That Neil Blake, of course, was brought in as chief executive, and I'll talk more about Neil, and his sort of role and the amazing job that he's doing later. Back to the question. So, having got a chairman, and at the time we agreed that I would stand down as chairman. I thought it was the politically correct thing to do, having put the club previously into administration. And Eddie asked me, to continue as vice chairman, which I was very happy to do, because somebody else could, get the abuse, not to put too fine a point on it. So Eddie and Neil Blake were effectively running the football club on a day-to-day basis. I had my own responsibilities of what I'd committed myself to in respect of raising funds for the football club. So we would share the responsibility and the targets, and Steve and I, would go off and sort of raise money for whatever we committed ourselves to, and Eddie and his team would raise the other half. And generally speaking, I think we did a very good job in raising money for running the business. At these board meetings, there was always going to be a shortfall, and whereas I thought I wouldn't have to bring the checkbook to the meetings, out came the checkbook again. And at that stage, Eddie and I were writing checks 50-50. So if there was a shortfall of 50,000 for wages, then we would put in equal, as Eddie had always said, we're equal partners at the time, in round terms. So therefore we would mirror each other, and I didn't mind that, because I could somehow see a way forward. Under Eddie's stewardship at the time, it was less stressful for me because I didn't have to be at the football club every day, and it became his responsibility to ensure that the money that we were raising was spent wisely over and above the commitments of paying the staff and the players. And it was a complete contrast to previously. I remember our early board meetings going back to the dark days. There was only one thing on the agenda. Well, sort of legally you have the number of things, right? The minutes of the last meeting, are they approved? Yes. Right, Jeff, sign this. Right, we need £100,000, for whatever. Have you got your checkbook, Jeff? Yes. Check signed. Right, any other business? And I felt like saying that instead of date of next meeting, it should be date of next check, because that's what it appeared to be. So things had changed somewhat, that there was somebody else now sharing the financial responsibility. And I loved the style of, hang on, let's stand on our own 2 feet here, let's not write checks. So we were, I think, both quite hard taskmasters in trying to ensure, because it was in our interest to make sure that the team collectively raised the money that we were looking to raise through season ticket sponsorship, you name it, anything that we could raise money on, we did.
And then towards the end of 2011, we were back in League One.
Yes.
And Maxim Demin arrived at the club. I believe it was Eddie Mitchell that met him through some kind of property deal. Mm-hmm. And you sold your shares to him. Did that cover your losses over the years?
No, nothing will ever cover your losses in football, unless you're selling a Premier League club. To me, it wasn't about the money. Let me make that absolutely clear. It helps. So I wouldn't want to be disrespectful, to our supporters or anybody listening to this and say, the money doesn't matter. It mattered a hell of a lot, as I'd already alluded to, because I'd certainly put my money where my mouth was. I'd met Maxim probably 12 months before I actually sold. And Maxim, I built up a very, very strong relationship with Maxim and his entourage, as well as his family. And I would, having made the mistake once of sort of being party to the sale to Paul Baker and Savvy, what I didn't want to do was make the same mistake again. So I had a responsibility that if anybody was going to buy my half of the football club, it was going to be somebody that had the financial ability and the desire and the love of the football club to mirror mine. I say that apart from the financial ability, obviously, is in a totally different league with Maxim to me, but the passion. Bear in mind, I came, here from Manchester. He's come here from Russia, so I felt quite local, by comparison to Maxim. And I wanted to make sure he had that passion before saying, yes, you can take the club forward. And Eddie and I had discussed this, and Eddie had said, I think we've got to the stage now where we want to really push the football club forward. Do you actually want to physically put another fortune into the football club? That was really the question. And of course, as you also alluded to, that Eddie had built Maxim a house, and that's how they first met. And it appeared that he had a substantial amount that he wanted to invest into the football club, and I felt that why would I, of all people, want to stand in the way of progress for the football club and to take the club into a new era for purely selfish reasons, like I'm a shareholder of the football club. It's irrelevant in the overall arms plot of where we came from to where we were. And I felt the time was right at that stage for me to sell my half of the football club to Maxim and to effectively, continue to work, as Maxim had said he would like me to continue as vice chairman, which again was extremely flattering. And I just felt that the football club would see a completely new era, and that's proved to be the case.
Because we were then promoted last year amidst great scenes of joy, Eddie Howe's return in October 2012. Actually, I'd like to touch on that. You were obviously around the football club when that happened. We'd had Lee Bradbury as manager and Paul Groves as well. But it was the return of Eddie Howe. He seemed to return and wave a wand, and then everything was all right. Yes. But was it must have been, it felt, certainly following it, like I said, from a distance, his return, I was very keen for him to return.
Yes.
I found it difficult to accept anybody else as manager after he left, actually.
Yeah.
What was it like in terms of the process of negotiating his return? Were you involved in that much?
Well, I was involved in... I think that the reason I'm hesitating here is to go through things chronologically, that we made a decision after the Crawley game away, and I'm actually amazing myself today with how clear the mind is. And sort of Eddie Mitchell had turned around to me. I had the relationship with Eddie Howe. Obviously there is conjecture as to what happened when Eddie left. and the reasons why Eddie left. And I'd rather not, elaborate on that. I think, everything that's been said is in the public domain, and, relationships occasionally break down. That one did, and it resulted in Eddie moving away. It wasn't the only reason. There were personal reasons, for Eddie to go. But in terms of, trying to get Eddie back, I think that, Eddie Mitchell felt that I was probably, and Maxim felt I was probably the best person to speak to Eddie if anybody was going to speak to him, because of my relationship had always remained completely straight and sound. So there is a few grey areas around the initial discussions, and because of contractual reasons, one has to be extremely careful about what I'm saying, and it's often known at the football club about the phone call that never happened. So I'd rather keep it to the phone call that never happened, especially my involvement with the football league as well. And you have to be respectful. Managers, if anybody approached Eddie Howe now without our permission, we would feel aggrieved. And certainly Lee Hughes is a very good friend of mine at at Burnley, and he wouldn't want to be disrespectful. So we eventually made an approach to Burnley for permission to speak to Eddie, that was eventually granted. And as far as we were concerned, he was the only person that we wanted. Although we had a long list of applicants, and who wouldn't want to suddenly come out of the woodwork and manage a football club, with new owners, with the potential of investment going into the football club, the structure and the ambience of the ground, the surroundings had changed dramatically. Again, all credit to Eddie in the first period of our relationship, the first 2 years, because we were funding things then, and there were things that were done that I didn't particularly like. There's the famous car park. I'd rather pay the players than. But as it happens with hindsight, that was wonderful, because that's the first impression that people get of the football club, and we've got on from strength to strength. So bringing Eddie back, I think, was just a master stroke. And why it happens in football, I just cannot ever imagine that having won, I think it was one of the first 12 games, that we suddenly only lose 2 of the next 22 with practically the same playing squad. I've got no idea what kind of magic wand Eddie carries, but it must be a big one.
Eddie Mitchell stepped down in September, and with quite a bit of support. I think the Echo were quite keen. I spoke to Neil Meldrum on one of the podcasts, and this was before you'd become the chairman again. He recommended you stepping into the hot seat. You came back. Were you pleased?
I was thrilled. Yeah, I didn't hesitate. When I got the call, because it is quite strange. People don't know whether I've been here when I've been away. I've been here all the time. There was just that period from October in 2008, I think it was, until we took over the club again. And bearing in mind, those negotiations started around March time. So it was a matter of months. It was just over that winter period. So to get a call from Maxim in Moscow to say that the management team, obviously not including me, but I at that stage didn't know what was going on, had all agreed, including, and this meant a lot to me, that Eddie Howe and Jason were part of that process. Of election process, if that's what we could call it. And it's very, very rare. I don't know if there is a precedent for a manager being involved in the appointment of a chairman. I think I would like to know if there was a precedent for that. I very much doubt it. But to actually have the support of Eddie and Jason means an awful lot to me, and I think speaks volumes for the relationship that we've had from the first minute that I came into the football club and Eddie and Jason came back to the football club. I didn't hesitate for one moment. I was both, thrilled and flattered.
It's interesting you say you didn't hesitate, and I remember you being in the press just prior to your appointment saying you'd be happy to do it if you were asked to do so, but you didn't have any concerns regarding what happened in the past in terms of the flack that you'd taken?
No, because I felt that what was quite interesting is in the period that I became vice chairman, the people that I meet week in, every week at the football club, both home and away, were very, very generous in their comments and sentiments to me. And I suddenly realised that if we went back to our hardcore supporters of, say, 5,500, 6,000 people, I felt that somewhere, and I might be thinking too highly of myself here, but 5,500 people, liked me, and yet the people that didn't like me were the ones that I read their comments. There was a hardcore of just maybe, I don't know if it was even 100 people that were posting, aggressive, abusive comments. And yet you tend to read those week in and week out, because the people that are your followers very seldom say well done. So I just felt that over the period of being vice chairman, those people that very seldom said well done were actually saying it week in and week out, and I felt I actually had an awful lot of support from our supporters, and of equal importance, if not of greater importance internally, that the comments from the players and the managers and the staff were of such support that I knew that if I accepted this role, I would literally have, everybody's support, from the latest recruit off the field to the latest trialist in the dressing room. And that, I think that meant, again, a great deal to me, because unless you've got the support, in particular downstairs and the staff, you can't do your job. And I didn't hesitate because the fear factor, had gone. I felt I could come in and help take a business forward. And probably for the first time in my tenure here, since I first came through the door in 2006 to taking over the club in March 2007, I could actually help to run a football club as opposed to be out on the road looking for finance. Because I don't mind admitting it, I didn't run the football club first time around. I was never here to run the football club. I was out, as I've again said, from Land's End to John O'Groats looking for investment.
The fans don't hear anything from Maxim Demmin. He's obviously a very private man. I don't know what his English is like. There was a clip somewhere I saw of him doing a Russian TV. Yeah. That was the first time I'd ever really seen him speaking. You've assumed obviously the role of spokesman for the club. Is it straightforward working in that way with the owner?
Yeah, very straightforward. He's not a secretive person, he's a private person, and there's a big difference. And here at the football club now, Neil Blake is our chief executive. I said earlier that, I want to, speak about Neil. Neil, I think, again, for the first time, is able to run the football club as the chief executive. Working with Eddie, is in control of absolutely everything. And no matter what your title is, I could be vice chairman, he's, chief executive, Max, head of media. You're actually working, directly for Eddie and what he wants to see and how it's done. I think since September, since I've sort of come back into the football club, I've sort of given people far more autonomy. And I want to make it absolutely clear, Neil Blake, I'm chairman of the football club. Neil Blake is responsible for running the football club on a day-to-day basis. And whatever I do to complement Neil's work. And Neil does the most incredible job. I don't think he's ever had the praise and the recognition for the work he's done, because people have always seen it as Eddie, is doing the work. So working with Neil and working with Maxim is very, very easy for me. As I said, I've got a fantastic relationship with Maxim. and I've got a great relationship with Neil, and I feel I've also got a very good, respectful relationship with the heads of all of our departments. With Liz, with Max, and with Rob in particular. I have a very, very strong, respectful relationship, and I think that is, I work with people, I don't work against them. And I think that the changes in the football club since September, people have seen that, my vocabulary starts off with please and thank you. My mum and dad, bless them, taught me that it costs nothing. You don't need a university education to say please and thank you. And I don't think anybody could be more respectful of staff than I am. And I just feel that brings out the best in everybody. And the way we share the workload, I work very closely with Neil. I work closely with Maxim. Maxim will ask me to achieve, certain goals, which I will do my utmost to achieve, and Neil will ask me to help, with certain issues, and we try to do things, together. But as I say, he runs the football club, on a day-to-day basis. I'm here to help. And Maxim's got the most incredible relationship with both Eddie and Jason, probably as close, if not closer, than any owner-manager relationship that I've ever known or known in the Football League.
Just getting back to the issue of finance, something we've heard a lot about in the past few months is the financial fair play regulations. Is it possible to summarise what that means and how it affects the football club?
Yes, I think without being too specific, the nuts and bolts of it is that the four divisions, or there's three divisions of the Football League, and we're in the top tier of that, and then there's the Premier League, and the Premier League have a separate set of rules. It's still called financial fair play, but all of this is very much in its embryonic stage, as you'll appreciate. It's taken the Football League a long time to get everybody to commit to it, because at the moment there's no sanctions within the Championship. And the difference is that within the lower two divisions of the Football League, which of course prior to this season we have been part of, you have the salary cost management protocol. I'm glad I've had a coffee instead of a gin and tonic to get that out, and that varies in the two divisions. If we take last season, in the first division, you're not allowed to spend more than 65% of your turnover on players' wages, and that has now gone down to 60%. And if you breach that, then there's generally a transfer embargo, but every case is dealt with on an individual basis. The lower division, the second division, have had this in place for a couple of seasons now, and they are now down to 50%. And it proves it works, because the amount of clubs that are suffering serious financial difficulty in the lower two divisions has diminished quite rapidly over that period. And it's noticeable, in particular in the second division, that it really does work. The whole rationale is that it's designed to create as near a level playing field as possible. Now, you're never going to get a level playing field when you've got Bradford attracting, 20,000 people, and Accrington, with 1,000, because it's all based on income, and it's based on, the commercial appetite of the grounds. Once again, using Bradford as an example, they've got huge commercial opportunities, whereas the lower clubs in that division will struggle. So there's always going to be the wealth will always come out on top. In the Championship, it changes. So we are actually disadvantaged this year compared with last year, because one of the other key ingredients is that although you have to manage within the confines of those percentages, you can actually put in unlimited investment. So this has to be equity into the football club, not loans. So last year, of course, we could put in more money, than we would have wanted to, but without any penalty. This year, the criteria in the Championship is completely different because it's based on break-even and then a percentage above that. And you're sort of working circa 5 to 8 million is the maximum that you can breach the break-even in this particular term. Now, you've seen in the press recently that QPR are said to be somewhere in the region of 80 million above the break-even. This is in deficit, not in credit. So how does that work? Well, it works that they'll get back to the Premier League and there will be fines. The Football League have suggested, along with the Premier League, and this again is conjecture, it's not fact, that they could actually face fines that are the equivalent of next year's Premier League windfall, which is about 80 million. Would the owner care? I would suggest again, without let Tony, suggest whether he would. They wouldn't be putting in that money if he actually, cared, because you've got money then coming into the Premier League over 4 years. We've got to be very careful, and along with other clubs in the Championship, it is reported that probably half the league will be in breach of the financial fair play rules, this year. And as a director of the Football League, I was one of the sort of selected 4, along with the chairman, that went to see the Premier League last year to put forward a case for a stop to parachute payments, or a change in the rules regarding parachute payments, because again it creates an uneven playing field. If you think the 3 teams that were relegated last year received 23 million minimum this year, that's before a ball's kicked, and that's going to be far more than most clubs' turnover, in the year. So how can it be actually fair and even? You've also got Wolves, who are receiving a parachute payment windfall this year that they never expected, because the parachute payment started off as 2 years, then went to 3 years and 4 years, of which Portsmouth, received 9 million this year. Although they didn't physically get it because of their administration, it was a credit to somebody, within the debt regime. So you have clubs that the idea of the Premier League was that this was going to encourage those clubs to spend money when they're in the Premier League, not do what Blackpool did, which Carl might be the shrewd owner here. He didn't spend any, and they were relegated, but they don't have any financial problems. The whole idea of the parachute payments was to ensure that clubs committed themselves to high wages in the Premier League. If they were relegated, they still had sufficient money to cover those contracts that, generally speaking, are 2 years. So we as a Football League feel that 4 years is outrageous. Nobody has a 4-year contract. So what is the rationale behind paying them that? So we're disadvantaged this year. And like I say, there probably will be at least 12 clubs that are in breach next year. Sanctions, will take place, and normally it would start off with being a transfer embargo, and then there may be financial penalties, and then who knows, it may turn to points deduction at some stage in the future. We've got to try to make sure that our commercial income is maximised, and this is what I'm doing at the football club, which is why sort of Neil and Maxim, will happily run along with all the finances, and Neil will run the club. I'm trying to do as much as I can to help Rob Mitchell, our commercial director, to increase the commercial revenue as much as possible, because that in turn will allow us to put more money back into the playing squad. So I hope, that it is a difficult subject to understand, but I think in summary, in the first and second division, you have set limits, on percentages with a transfer embargo for those in breach. In the Championship, it is it's more straightforward, but more difficult to adhere to, because you've got clubs that are in our league. You've seen Bolton's, results this week. I rest my case. Compared with all those football clubs that are ex-Premiership clubs, we are managing our way very, very nicely, thank you.
And that must have an impact on transfer activity in terms of fees that we can pay and wages. It must be difficult for a club like us in the Championship to attract the players that would be able to make a difference, because we're not a massive club. The players will look around and they'll get offers from elsewhere. Higher wages would obviously make a difference, but a bigger club as well. And I suppose hanging on to our players is a factor there as well. And all of that must be a real challenge.
It's a massive challenge. You know, I think you wake up on the 1st of January, and if you could get in a TARDIS and get to the 1st of February without taking a phone call, it would be utopia. For myself, Maxim, Neil Blake, and Neil Vacher, our club secretary, that would be absolute utopia. It doesn't happen, and therefore we have to manage what we have. What we have here is we have a real family club. We have, I think, tremendous ambience at the ground. You think of where we came from and how the stadium and our facilities look now. We have, in my opinion, as good a manager, if not the best manager, pound for pound, in the Championship, and if not the Football League. I alluded to it earlier. He's certainly the most sort of articulate, the most intellectual, the most thoughtful, the most, I think, pleasing personality. So we can attract people through that, through our location, through Eddie's and Jason's ambitions, and through Maxim's ambitions. Everybody is aware of Maxim's ambitions, which mirror our own. A lot of people will think it's a fantasy for this football club ever to get to the Premier League. I suppose that if you think of the word fantasy and dreams, most people will think fantasies don't happen, but dreams can come true. So I suppose if we felt that it was, if I rephrased that and said it's our dream to be within the Premier League echelon, then dreams can come true. And trust me, it is an ambition and it's a desire. And I think that when we're trying to attract players here, that is something that is on everybody's mind. And if you look at the type of players we're trying to attract because of the financial constraints upon us, and these financial constraints are within the rules as opposed to what we could actually afford to pay, you have to be realistic. We try to have a sort of a wage limit here so that it's respectful to other people within the dressing room. But we like to feel that in competitive terms that we can offer people a future that is maybe rosier than them joining what would perceive to be a bigger club than ours. And we mentioned the likes of Wigan and Bolton and Blackburn earlier on, but that have severe financial problems compared to us. And whereas we're on the ascendancy, are those other clubs playing on their historic past and going in the reverse direction. So I like to feel that we are still competitive within the framework of the financial fair play regulations, but our ambition is as big and as high as anybody else's. But you actually hit the nail on the head. We have a maximum capacity here of, in round figures, 12,000. With segregation, it's a few bodies less than that. I'm always arguing with Liz. I'd like to get 14,000 into a 12,000 stadium. She wants to get 11,700, if we can. But on health and safety, she's the general manager. She always wins the argument. We know that our income cannot match that of, for instance, our past game at the Amex, where they have 23,000 season tickets. And although the crowd was announced as 28,100, I think, they count the number of tickets sold as opposed to bums on seats. So they're never going to have a crowd less than 23,000, even if nobody turned up for a game. That's huge income, and we're very envious of that. But we are where we are, and we're working within the the confines of what we have to achieve. But I like to think that from top to bottom, when it comes to trying to attract people, they talk to the manager, they talk to Jason, they'll talk to Neil, they'll talk to me. We're full of enthusiasm. You know, our glass is always overflowing. It's not even half full. It's overflowing with enthusiasm, and that is God's greatest gift. And, you know, I think we're good at stroking people. I think we're good at making people feel special, welcome, and we're good at making people realise that there is a huge future being part of this football club.
You touched on the subject of the stadium there. One thing the fans are always keen to discuss is the ownership of the stadium. Can you see there being any developments in that in the future?
At the moment, it doesn't suit us to take ownership. It's financially sound for us to be paying what we're paying at the moment. It suits Maxim in particular. It suits his plan, and I think unfortunately it suits the landlord down to the ground. The return that he's getting at the moment, he would be the envy of most banks, let alone most landlords. So it's very, very difficult to reach any form of compromise. But, what you have to do is also take into account our ambitions. And, when you look at the ambitions of the football club, you have to sort of think beyond, where we are now. But there is also a period of consolidation. One thing, that I have to ensure is that everybody's feet is firmly on the floor, because you can't be a fantasist all your life, you can't be a dreamer all your life. And whilst I think goals and ambitions are essential for anybody to be successful, you have to look at now, of where we are now. And at the moment, the word consolidation is always perceived to be negative, and that's why I don't use it that often. I allow other people to say, do you want to just consolidate this season in the Championship? Well, if the answer is, do we want to actually stay here rather than go back to Division 1? The answer is, let's consolidate. If you want to push on, and that's what we want to do, you consolidate at your own risk, because people say that a successful season for the football club would be to finish fourth from bottom would be successful. Setting your target to finish fourth from bottom is fraught with danger, because if you don't reach your target, it's goodbye to the Championship. So I would rather set a target of trying to finish the season in the best possible place that we can, and as high in the table as we possibly can, without limitations, but by also being realistic.
At the end of last season, there was a little bit of talk about possibly moving to a different ground. I personally think that wouldn't be something that would be happening anytime soon, because we're not filling the ground every single week, and also I definitely wouldn't like to move to another location. Having a larger ground here would be fine as long as we had the fans. Do you think that really is a realistic possibility going forward?
Whether it's realistic or not, only history, and time will actually tell. What we have to do as the custodians, of the football club, and that's what we are, because we always know that you're passing. The one consistent thing about any football club are the supporters. Players come and go, chairmen come and go. And we were talking the other day that in the media and commercial department that there's a danger if there's two doors. In the kitchen it's clearly marked in and out. A revolving door at a football club, I think, would be absolutely purpose-built, because it serves its purpose for everybody that is a custodian or a tenure. The only thing it doesn't say on your contract is what time you're leaving, or when you're leaving. We know when you've arrived because it's the date you sign the contract. So I would not say that it is not a possibility. What I would say is, as a responsible officer of the business and the football club, we have to ensure that we are constantly looking at fulfilling the dream in the future and where that would be achieved. And as you said, if we couldn't get planning permission here, you would never survive in the Premier League with a ground that only holds 12,000 people. And certainly what I'd like to say is that, any reality we would like to think is in our, our homeland, in our location. So that, I think, is a more, honest answer. But all the time you have to look at what is available. The last thing you want is to be put in a position where you have got no alternative in your mind, or any alternative that might be a feasible location, and then be faced with Hobson's choice, with a gun to your head, and suddenly the price of any land or development quadruples because you actually haven't given any thought to the future. And I think every football club, of our desire and our size, looks towards the future, and we're constantly looking at what the alternatives are that don't disadvantage any of our supporters, but at the same time might enhance the benefits to the football club in the future.
On another structural matter, at the end of last season there was also some talk about the construction of a slip road onto the Wessex Way. Is that still in the pipeline?
It is very much in the pipeline. Ironically, we had an email only this morning that we've got the fors and against. I'm working very closely with Tobias Elwood and the Minister of Roads, and in fact it's one of the things that was sort of thrust upon me. Jeff, get this done. And this was even sort of going back to my early relationships with Eddie. So I'm trying to, give everybody, of parliamentary influence a cuddle, a stroke, a glass of wine, whatever it takes. And, just to emphasise this, at our last home match, I had Tobias Elwood, I had the Lord Lieutenant, and I had the High Sheriff in the boardroom. I did joke with them, apart from Maid Marian and Little John, I had the full set, in the boardroom. So I'm working night and day to try to get, some result on this. Now, whether or not it results in us having to fund part of this, we haven't ruled that out, because, trying to get money out of, any ministerial cabinet is very, very difficult indeed. And what I do realise is that whenever there's a pending election, that everything will come to a grinding halt. So what I don't want to do is get down the road to the extent that we're getting people committed to this, and then suddenly, the coffers are closed until a new government comes in, and then you start all over again. So I think by offering some kind of financial support for both the government of the day and local government, I think we're going to make far more progress than we otherwise would. But it's absolutely essential. I wrote such a hard-hitting letter, to the minister, with the support of Tobias, even threatening the return of, hooliganism. The government itself have tried to, outlaw, because you are driving people. You take the Real Madrid game. Took people 2.5 hours to get away from the game, and we had 11,100 here at our last home game. We don't want to drive people into town who are frustrated with overheating cars that want to take it out on the local community. So that's how strong I have voiced an opinion on behalf of the football club, and it is right up on my agenda. I say, ironically, you should ask the question today. We've actually had correspondence with government this morning.
And we spoke a little bit just now about the attendances that we've been getting, which have been pretty strong this season. I was delighted when the season ticket pricing came out in the summer for our first season in the Championship. Have you had any discussions going forward on ticket prices?
Not as yet. We just want to maintain that value for money. That's, I think, the ethos of the football club. And I think that what is interesting under the current ownership, where Maxim is now in total control of the finances, we have the ability to ensure that we're giving value for money all the time. When I go back again to the dark days, you had to get as much as you possibly could from a seat. Now the pressure is not quite the same, but again, I've previously said, we have to maximise the commercial income, at the football club. That makes the difference between success and failure. But we will always be giving the best possible value for money for our supporters. And I think Bradford have a great model. I think this year it's 12,000 season tickets, certainly between 10 and 12,000. We were thinking of this model, at a very early stage, that they are offering 12,000 people the opportunity to buy a season ticket at half price, subject to selling 12,000. So if 11,800 apply, the deal's off. And the rationale is that you're going to get the same, you're only going to sell 6,000 at the full price anyway. So economically, the club is no better off. The supporters are better off, but what you get is an atmosphere of 12,000. I know their stadium's 20,000, but we could do something, you could do something similar. This year we've sold 6,000 season tickets, which is twice as many as they've sold in the history of the football club. So it just shows there is an appetite for the championship and certainly the type of football that we're playing.
And there's been a couple of things that have changed around the club recently. I'm talking about the closure of Legends and Hot Radio. Can you give us any insight into why those things have happened?
Well, Hot Radio is an ongoing situation, so I don't really want to comment about that because there is a sort of a period that we are trying to establish an ongoing business, and it's really the real estate that was causing us problems within the football club of both of those assets. With Legends, as you know, we were looking at building a pavilion on the new training pitches for the players. The one thing that Eddie Howe, has maintained is that the club is a little bit, it's not quite like the house that Jack built, but when you start adding, bits to football clubs as opposed to the Amex, and I'm not comparing us with the Amex, but the only thing I'm comparing is they had a drawing board and nothing on it. So you can build whatever you want. We've had to add and take away, and for offices as the club has grown, the infrastructure of the club has grown. We now nearly have as many analysts as we had players. When I first got involved here, with a transfer embargo, we only had 19 players. We've now got physios, analysts, everything that you need to compete with the clubs that are in this championship on a level playing field. Forget the finances of the players. I'm talking about the preparation for a game. And Eddie, we've been short of space, and he's been having meetings with some players in his office in the tunnel. Other players have been meeting in a non-suitable video room. We've been utilising the McAllister suite, for the players to eat. And what the vision was with the pavilion, that would be, as nearly every club in this division, maybe with the exception of Yeovil, who came up with us, have got a purpose-built, tailor-made area for the players and the analysts to sit and talk business. And that's what the people tend to forget, that we're in the business of the first team in particular, and the development squad, with them to win games. And we've got to facilitate everything that our manager and the analysts need in order to get the best possible results on a Saturday. And I know the supporters would buy into that. So Legends, was the only place that we had in terms of real estate that would be suitable to transfer into a purpose-built, I say, theatre for the players to be allowed in there en masse, as opposed to two at a time. Let's take the two that are playing up front next week, and we'll have Lee in, because Mossy will want a one-on-one with him. So we've got a purpose-built theatre in there now for them to analyse the previous games, to analyse individual performances of the players, And the manager actually feels that it's for the very first time at the football club, it's a home for the players where they eat. They can eat, sleep, and drink. In that particular room. And the players love it. They feel relaxed in there. They feel it's private. There's nowhere else. They could be coming in here. They could be going into Eddie's office. It's not private, and it's not fit for purpose. I think that is the point. And unfortunately, from an economic point of view, that there were the same people were eating in Legends, and if you took away the players going in there and the staff going in there, economically it wasn't viable. But it wasn't the economics that closed it. That was just another, if I needed to throw in another reason. And at the end of the day, my responsibility and Neil's responsibility to Maxim is to make sure that the bottom line is as big as possible. So that was the only place that we could house it. And, I could not feel more for our supporters than having to close something that was very dear to their hearts, in particular those that used to come down during the day and have coffee. And I've promised them that we are looking, at another home for them. And that's exactly what I'm doing. And we will come up with something. It may not replicate Legends, and it may not provide, a full menu of food, but something somewhere will be found so that if people want to come to the football club during the day, with a friend, they can have a coffee and a cake. It may be more sort of Starbucks-like, albeit in-house, in case we're not getting involved with Starbucks, but it's set in-house for a coffee and a cake and a place to come and sit and enjoy.
Jeff, you've been very generous with your time for this interview. Just to finish on a positive note, you clearly have derived a lot
We haven't been positive.
Well, you've gone into a lot of detail about a lot of the ups and downs at the club over the years, which you've been party to. You obviously get a lot of satisfaction from your involvement with the club. What is it that you enjoy the most about being the chairman?
I feel that giving my time to others, and being respectful to others, as the chairman of the football club, I think that it's a position that is often abused, and I think it's a position where some chairmen, of football clubs are sort of highly egotistical, and it's all about them. I don't want to get into any controversy over the sort of Cardiff sort of issues of the past couple of weeks, but this is not about me. I just love the role, the involvement, the day-to-day involvement with the staff, with the players, with the supporters. Nothing gives me greater pleasure than Saturday, being with our supporters. And I just get an immense pride in being the chairman. But I think that also, as chairman of the football club, to give my time to the staff, to players, to anybody that actually wants my support, fills me with the most pride. And to serve the football club the way I feel I have done, because I'm just a servant of the football club, to serve the football club the way I have over the last 7 years, on reflection through all the highs and lows, I just feel, now for the first time I'm able to, I think, possibly enjoy myself as well, to look back on the dark days, but to look ahead of, the rainbows that are ahead of us.
Well, thank you for sparing time for this interview, and thanks for all your hard work and indeed endurance over the years, and hopefully we'll get to speak to you again soon.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time that you've given up on behalf of the football club as well.
Big thanks to Jeff for coming on the show, and I hope you found it as interesting as I did hearing what he had to say. If you want to catch up with any previous episodes of the podcast, check out the website at www.alldepartments.wordpress.com. You can get in touch by emailing alldepartmentspodcast@gmail.com and follow on Twitter at alldepartments. That's pretty much it for now. But before we go, I thought I'd take the opportunity with Liverpool on the horizon to reprise Ian Thompson's description of scoring against Man United 30 years ago from the last episode of the podcast. So up the cherries in all departments, and goodbye.
Everald Larond, I think it was, it took a free kick, which was just inside our half. He launched it into the box. A couple of United defenders seemed to head it and get in each other's way, and it didn't go very far, maybe to the edge of their box. And then, of all people, Brian Robson made a bit of a mess of it. You nipped in and cracked it into the net.
Yeah, I think this was a classic case of and I would say, Brian Robson, England captain, what a great player he was. But it was just a moment where he hesitated just for a minute, and I was on the move. And I kind of had up a head of steam, and we both went for the ball at the same time. But because I was on the move, I kind of got my foot in first, and actually the ball then tangled in my feet a little bit, and I just managed to dig it out. And for some reason, Gary Bailey had sort of almost gone down on haunches a little bit, I think expecting a low shot. But as it had come, I got it out of my feet. I guess I was probably about 14, 15 yards out, and I struck it really, truly, quite unexpectedly myself, because I'd almost got it tangled up in my feet. And he didn't get a hand on it, and it just, it just sailed into the net. And there is this moment when you just think, I don't believe this just happened, and I don't think anybody could. And and as I say, that going from 1-0 to 2-0 in 2 minutes, I think settled everybody down, and we probably just thought, well, we're going to win this game because they haven't troubled us. We're going to win this game. And I remember sort of, running up the side in front of the crowd with some ridiculous celebration. But then who cares?